In the last 50 years, cities have been relentlessly eating away at the expanses of countryside. In the face of this widespread urbanization, it is imperative that we rethink the way we design our cities and construct our buildings. Spewing masses of waste and carbon dioxide, consuming alarming quantities of water and energy, our cities are a heavy burden on our ecosystem. Our dwellings themselves have a tremendous impact on the environment. Their construction and daily consumption are responsible for half of the greenhouse gases released into the atmosphere today. In architecture, the question of taking ecological considerations into account arose in the early 70s. And what were the answers at that time? A drastic move back to nature, or the high-tech city enclosed in a glass bubble, a symbol of a protected, controlled environment?
As early as, it must have been 1967, we did a project, and in that project we were looking at ways to use wind turbines to harvest energy, to work with the forces of nature. We were collecting water, rainwater, moving it along small canals that were part of the architecture of the planning, reusing the step slopes, the olive groves for traditional forms of housing. And so that's a very early interest which has developed, gathered momentum over time. Been very fortunate to engage with a German culture which is genuinely green, not just in fashionable terms of talking about it, but a very keen debate and a very real environment.
Since the 70s, the way ecology has been incorporated into building practices has evolved considerably. Moving beyond slightly naive or radical ecology, the concept of sustainable ecology has been embraced. The Millau Viaduct, which for some people has disfigured the valley forever, is nevertheless an example of sustainable architecture. In fact, it has allowed the people of Millau to take back their city, which, for too long, had been paralysed by holiday traffic. Motorists willing to pay the price can also save 2 hours of driving time and enjoy more comfortable road conditions.
I think that in one sense the competition was almost a philosophical exercise, because you have the river Tarn, and everybody thinks of it as a bridge over the River Tarn. And if you follow that, you would do a sort of heroic span across the river. But really, the river is very narrow. So you could argue that this bridge is not about spanning the river, but it is about spanning the 2.5 kilometers from plateau to plateau. It's about spanning the valley. And if you take that approach, then you have these columns that march across the countryside at the widest possible span, and then you suspend the thinnest road, a road which is actually the highest elevated road in the world. Just to give an idea of the scale, this column here is taller than the Eiffel Tower. So the scale is really, it's a new dimension. It's quite heroic. Another aspect of the bridge is that what you do not see from this view of the model, but which if you move across to here and you imagine that you're driving along it, and you look along here, you see this very, very graceful curve. So it reveals the bridge, it reveals the three-dimensional form, a much more interesting experience to drive on that curve.
While the development of national transport systems is an important issue, it is within today's asphyxiating metropolises that transport and traffic problems require urgent attention. What can be done to fight urban pollution?
What we don't talk about is the whole concept of urban comfort. Now, it's not bad. The traffic's flowing more or less, and we're in a comfortable situation. Even if it gets heavier, it's not a problem because we're not in a hurry. But we wouldn't be in a comfortable situation anymore. That's what we need to be able to deal with, rather than talking about getting rid of cars or everybody using the underground. That's ridiculous. It's dogmatism.
The city of Paris has opted for developing bus and bicycle lanes to the detriment of the comfort of car users. They must pay in time and stress for choosing to get around the capital whilst polluting its streets.
It's obvious that transport affects the sustainability of a city, and this is major. In terms of sustainability, this is environmental quality. In other words, the question of pollution, the question of noise, the question of road safety, the question of energy consumption, all at the heart of transport policies. Yet, at the same time, it is also the sustainability of a city in terms of its acceptability. If you're not happy in the city, you'll get into a car at weekends and get away as quickly as possible. With Paris Beach, you restore human activity to the city centre, and as you can see, people are just mad about it. They really need it, and they come in throngs. Even if it's a bit crowded, they love being somewhere in the middle of the city, with some peace and quiet, and that's easy to get to because there's public transport. So you have Paris rediscovering its River Seine.
In London, some neighbourhoods have regained access to the Thames and the pleasures of the waterfront. To relieve traffic congestion in the city centre, it was decided that all drivers would have to pay a toll. The toll gate is almost invisible, yet discourages a number of vehicles. On average, the electric barrier's 200 cameras are enough to put off 1 out of every 4 cars. In the cities of the future, what means of transport will be used? What will the ideal, environmentally friendly city be like? What type of urban development plan would help control energy and water consumption? What kinds of buildings should be favoured?
I should explain to start off with that Barnsley lies in the north of England, near Leeds, or between Leeds and Sheffield, which are the two largest cities in that area. It's really, although it's been there for 800 or 900 years, it was a market town, but then because of the Industrial Revolution and because of cheap coal, then it really became a coal mining town. And we don't have to go into the history, we know the history of that. So Mrs. Thatcher in 1986, she closed the last coal mine in Barnsley. And for 10 years, they were crying, mourning the loss of coal mining. And then I think in the middle of the 90s, something like that, they start to wake up. They say, well, this is no good. We have to make a new future. Well, the Barnsley project started 1.5 years ago. Anyway, I was asked to, in the initial phases, to think of a vision for Barnsley into the future, and then to come back to a phased development of 5, 10, 15, and 25 years, how it could change. Barnsley didn't have any really great buildings in it, because all their heritage is underground, so it's invisible. It has a very beautiful town hall, which is perhaps the only good building, really good building in the whole town. And to me that was the starting point.
In the late 60s, when General de Gaulle was the President of France, he commissioned an urban development plan for Paris and the surrounding departments. Paris spread out like an oil stain, moving away from high-rises. The solution provided by Urban Development Plan of 1965 was to say, we can build towns on the outskirts of Paris about 30 kilometers away. Towns where you don't only find housing, but also employment and facilities. And that's how the idea of new cities in France came about. 5 were created around Paris. There were natural surges in urbanization. Housing was needed. There were vast stretches of land available at Senart, with railroads across, so, of course, we were going to build a new city. But rather than beginning with the centre, we developed 3 sectors, and the development of the new city as such was in essence the development of each of these cities. Obviously today we have to start thinking about a centralized place where you can find a complete range of facilities. The inhabitants have needs which aren't being met at a municipal level.
There are only 2,400 people living in the town centre. You say, well, that has to change, and many people live in very poor housing areas outside, which will come down. And there is a requirement for all of these towns in this region to actually build a lot of new homes over the next 10 years anyway. And so I thought the important thing was to just find a place to put these new homes, which is not just taking up more landscape. Therefore, I proposed, and they've accepted, that we build, over a number of years, a wall around the city centre.
While Barnsley has opted for having the countryside outside its walls to create a dense circular city, the new city of Senart, established 30 years ago, chose a very different vision.
The area is immense. That's already been said. It covers 12,000 hectares. It's as big as Paris, Bois de Vincennes and Bois de Boulogne put together. There are 100,000 inhabitants, which means a relatively low density. People live in towns and villages laid out around the church, the village square and municipal hall. I wanted to mark out a place with a distinct spatial organisation, one that was easily identified as being different than that of the surrounding villages and towns, which all have traditional rounder shapes. I was committed to showing that this area was immense and that the scene is happening here and not elsewhere. So there had to be some kind of clear identification of this place, to say that this is it, right here. You're in the square, and over there, just beside it, you're outside of the square. So you don't do the same things inside the square as outside the square. It's important to me that the square is not at all disconnected. It's not a closed shape, not a fortified camp. It's an open square, which first of all allows it to be more easily identified when you move about, because from all viewpoints you can tell where you're going and where you're coming from, so it's important. And the second thing is that it allows you to design things more simply. And lastly, if there's a mistake in the cast in filling it up, well, it's less serious. The urban network has to exist as such. That's what gives the Square project its character. We try to invest, to do things that are quite good and quite well thought out, so that there's some form of durability. Yet, on the other hand, I think we've thought about things that could be short-lived. And perhaps say, for example, that on the land in front of us, rather than building a permanent structure, we'll build something for a limited duration. Then we'll recuperate the land, which we've retained the ownership of, to use for other things later, when we have more information on the question. It's another type of approach. It's new, and it's just beginning to take shape now.
It's a living wall with housing, workshops, offices. I don't mind, it can be, but it should be a mixed development. Inside the wall, which is only about a kilometre diameter, we discovered that you could increase the population to 50,000 people living in the town. And on top, the only rule I make is that the top of the wall has to be horizontal and it has to have a park. And so in the end, I think you have to think about how people live. So if you have Sunday lunch with the family, which you should, and I can see you haven't had lunch with your mother for a long time, but you have a very nice lunch, roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, which is what they have, and then after lunch, I think we'll go for a walk around the wall. And after a little walk, there's a place where you can have a gin and tonic or a coffee or whatever, and you can look out, because it's on a hill, over this fantastic landscape. So at the same time you're increasing the density of the people living and working in the middle, you're also, where you remove houses on the outside because they're old, you return this to landscape.
There's no opposition between urbanism and architecture. They aren't two distinct things. They come from the same line of thinking about cities. Our work, even when it's only a small building, has to be seen in the larger perspective of cities. It's inseparable. That's why for us, cities are where life is. They're man's home. Nature is not at all home to man. Cities are man's nature. This is a very important point. So, all our work on our buildings should be seen from the larger perspective of cities. Cities are places of freedom. They're places of freedom of thought, freedom of speech and action, but also freedom in getting around. You always have to think about sustainable development in relation to human beings themselves and their aspirations. And sometimes these aspirations can fly in the face of precautionary measures. There's a lot of talk about precautionary measures. Precautionary measures are a dogma. Terrifying. I mean, with that, you can't do anything anymore. Sometimes you have to adopt a risk principle, and this includes the HQE, or the High Environment Quality approach. If you apply precautionary measures to designing buildings, we never would have evolved. So you can't trust shortcuts like that, like the notion of common sense. The notion of common sense in the environment, that makes two. If common sense is refusing to put buildings beside noisy motorways, you might say that's common sense. I've already heard that before, because we were talking about the noise in cities, so you shouldn't put buildings beside noisy roads. So where do you put buildings? Do you put them in the country or in the middle of the forest, so you cut down the trees?
countries of the European Union have all tried to encourage new sustainable building practices. The English with the BREEAM label and the French with the High Quality Environment or HQE approach. Generally speaking, an HQE building should not be harmful to the environment. At the design stage, materials with minimal energy costs are chosen. The construction must conform to the idea of a clean building site. During its active life, attention is given to both energy and water savings. At its death, the potential for the building's materials to be recycled is taken into consideration. In addition, the HQE approach enhances the health and well-being of the users.
Even if your initial investment costs are higher than in a standard approach, and you also have costs for follow-up studies, afterwards, the conceptual quality of your system and the savings you'll make on the different fluids, on energy and water, and also by setting up a well-adapted maintenance of material, which itself wears better, is such that you'll get it back in the daily and annual expenses of your building. That's what I call the first level. The second level is the level of quality. In other words, you're going to have a better overall quality, particularly in respect to your comfort objectives, whether it be thermal comfort, acoustics, in other words, the 4 types of comfort mentioned before. The last level is a civic approach, which might interest the public authorities. It's saying to yourself that at a global level, your little piece has contributed to reduce the overall impact on the environment.
I've heard a lot of things about high-quality environment and the cost. What we're trying to do is to integrate it without it hurting us too much, cost-wise. If HQE is limited to so-called luxury buildings, well, it just won't work, because there will be no environmental impact without a larger number of buildings involved. With only a few buildings, it could be very interesting and very useful in their role as symbols. A mainspring role for media coverage. But we have to get to the point where high-quality environment can be done at the same cost. You can't say that a building protects the environment. It's a trauma for the environment, but it should be a beautiful trauma.
I'm Peter Braithwaite. I'm a director of Arp & Partners, and I lead our sustainability consulting services. Arp are designers. We started off by designing buildings, but now we design a whole range of buildings, infrastructure and products. The building that we're in, the Arp campus, is a building that we designed ourselves, and we designed it really trying to demonstrate that using principles of sustainability we can produce a building which is cost effective and also a building which is very enjoyable to work in. The aspects of the building which we think we have succeeded in very well is it is naturally daylit, and this is helped by the pods in the roof which bring daylight down into the centre of the building. And we also have sort of holes in the floor which allows the light to spread down into the lower floor. The lighting is helped by the amount of glass that we have in the windows, and the windows are also an essential part of our natural ventilation. There are trickle vents at the top of the windows which allow cool air to trickle into the building, and that moves down and across it gets warmed up by the people and then goes up through the vents in the roof. The windows themselves are all able to be opened by individual people so that they can adjust their own comfort levels. As well as having a lot of natural daylight, we do have a lighting system, and the lighting system adjusts itself to daylight, so when the sunlight is strong, the lights turn down. It is a very open plan office, and in order to keep noise levels down, we have designed the lights so that they also act as acoustic baffles. The wings on either side of the lights actually absorb sound. While we have natural ventilation, which is very good for health, we took it one step further by designing the planting system. The plants that we have chosen absorb toxins and other chemicals which are given out by computers, by ourselves, by the carpets. And the plants also kick out oxygen, so it helps to polish the air. And the final element was water. Originally, we thought of collecting all of the rainwater so that we could reuse it, but this was not economical in this situation. So we have collected all of the water from the roof, and that is fed back into the ground by infiltration, and also part of it goes into the lakes which are supported on the site. So all of the elements that we've carried out within this building are elements of design which we can advise our clients on, and one of the main successes of this building is that we have here a naturally ventilated, naturally lit building which was costed at exactly the same as a traditional air-conditioned building. The external cladding of the building is all in Canadian cedar, and we chose this particular wood because it's very, very dense. It needs no oils, no preservatives, no maintenance over the whole life of the building. And when the building is finished, we have finished using the building, then all of the cedar can be stripped off and reused again. So none of it will be wasted. We've followed that design through to the structure itself, so all of the steelwork is bolted, and again the steelwork can be unbolted and reused.
With the successful recycling industry and properties enabling savings in innovation of all kinds, steel occupies an important place amongst environmentally friendly materials. The fundamental idea in sustainable architecture is to think of a building as an independent ecosystem integrated into the natural ecosystem.
I really wanted to live in the middle of nature, which you can see everywhere here, and to be separated from it only by a very thin high-tech layer, so that I'm always living outdoors, day and night. When I get up, when I go to bed, when I eat, and when I brush my teeth. It's an extraordinary feeling, something most people have never experienced. Living within transparency is very, very positive, because after a couple of months, you are in perfect harmony with nature. You notice what time of the day or year it is. You can tell what the temperature is by the color of the light. You open your eyes and look outside, and you know what time it is. It's a very important experience, well known to animals, but one that humans have lost. The whole house weighs 40 tons without the foundation. A normal building of this dimensions weighs approximately 10 times that. This means we only use 10% of the usual building materials. That's, of course, a cost-relevant factor. Of the 40 tons, the glass of the facade alone weighs 20 tons. And the structural steelwork, which includes the support and the girders making up the actual framework of the house, weighs only 10 tons. And besides the house being easily assembled and easily taken apart, there's also the very convincing aspect of it not needing energy, and that it's emission-free. It doesn't have a chimney.
Die Besonderheit des Hauses ist vielleicht darin zu sehen,
the particularity of the house is perhaps the fact that it doesn't weigh very much, so it doesn't have much thermal storage capacity. A house with thick walls needs a long time in the summer to warm up inside. This house reacts within minutes to weather changes.
Auf die Veränderung des Außen. Die
The solar panels we installed are approximately 140 square meters. It's a very high quality, extremely efficient solar generator. It's able to produce so much power that we have an annual energy balance of 0. That is, we use as much power from the public system as we give back. In fact, we have no electricity bill.
Die Luft kommt aus dem Garten.
Air comes from the garden, it's sucked up down there and then goes through a 36-meter underground conduit where it's warmed up to soil temperature in the winter or cooled down in the summer. For example, in the summer, when it's 32 or 36 degrees out, the air enters the house at 8 degrees from one of the 4 pipes on my left. In this house, in summer, you don't even feel like you're inside a house.
The Commerzbank to us was a very important building because it really broke the mold for towers to come. It is based on a V-shaped building, which is quite surprising for people that look at the tower, but it is actually a V shape, and that V always goes up by 4 floors and then turns by 120 degrees. And in the open side, we then established gardens. In the closed side, we established the offices. Through this game of continually changing V's every 4 floors, you actually get a structure that you can see on this diagram where the wind can actually move throughout the whole building. So you get a very open structure that allows ventilation to happen in the middle of the building, which at that point was revolutionary and no one had ever done it before. In the Commerzbank, every person at every workplace has real air and real daylight. And everyone has natural ventilation, and it can be very windy in Frankfurt, but still, because of a double facade, it allows the people to open their window all day long, and the external glass shield stops the wind blowing the paper off their desk. And in those times, the air conditioning is actually not switched on, and that is the best you can do for a building. That is true efficiency and true sustainability in that respect. The Swiss Re is, I would argue, a continuation of a theme that has started in the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank in Hong Kong and then in the Commerzbank. It is actually taking a volume. In this case, the volume is optimized in terms of its views, but now you see the important thing, it is carved in, and it is carving in these red slots, which we describe as the gardens of the building. Now you can see how the floors are developed, and to get an optimum ventilation that goes throughout those diagonal gardens. It's not just an architectural or a design feature to twist them. It's important to actually get the gardens to be on two sides. So from wherever direction the wind comes, a garden will always have plus pressure and negative pressure. We're always trying to work with the best team possible. We've formed very close relationships with engineers in various countries. And in the UK, which obviously is our base, we work closely with people like Battle McCarthy, BDSP, and over Arup. But then, as architects, we need the best structural engineer who hopefully is good enough to also take care of energy topics himself. Sometimes there's even a specialist for energy. You need a good landscape consultant. You need someone for lighting, acoustic, etc.
The GLA, home to the municipal government of Greater London, is the fruit of the latest computer modelling techniques. Its complex form contains the greatest interior volume with the least exterior surface area. In addition, this steel and glass sphere is skewed to capture sunlight. The building's cooling system uses cold groundwater pumped up from the water table via several wells drilled 125 meters deep beneath the building. The overall energy consumption of the GLA is 1/4 that of a well-insulated building of similar dimensions. Although high technology encourages innovation in terms of ecological architecture, fortunately, simple techniques can also be used in sustainable construction.
Hier auf der rechten Seite nochmals die Bibliothek.
Here on the right, you have the library with its beautiful reading terrace surrounded by water basins.
Von einem Wasserbecken umgeben ist. Zu diesen Innenhöfen, den Atrien.
In regards to these inner courtyards, the atria, I could explain quite a lot of things. They represent the green lungs of the building. For example, they give the volume of air needed to air condition the building. In the summer, they provide protection from the sun with their retractable awnings, something which is a common feature in greenhouses. The vegetation of the garden is luxuriant. Biologists from the institute here work with landscape designers.
Biologen vom Institut hier gemacht und Landschaftsplaner.
What's more, the atria thus help to improve the temperature of the building. They create shade in the summer and a thermal layer in the winter. The atria are made of simple glass. Their thermal border, in fact, is the isolated double facade of the building themselves. However, in the winter you can open the windows. The temperature's never below 0. To become colder, it would have to be less than -20 outside. So there's an air buffer between the inside and outside, which allows the air to circulate. This means that the fresh air is never completely cold, and in the winter there's no wind. The plants and the water renew the air, so it isn't actually necessary to ventilate the atria in the winter. It's like a closed cycle. However, in the summer the atria are opened up. Up above, the atria's roof can be opened up like a traditional greenhouses. You can see it at the curved tooth racks.
Die Dächer öffnen, man sieht es an den gerundeten Zahnstangen. Oder vorne an der Stirnfassade.
Or over there at the front, the glass strips can be opened to get a little breeze.
Möglich ist. Hier hinten
over there in the back, hidden between the shrubs, you can see ventilation screens. They are connected via an underground conduit which brings cold air from the north side of the building into its interior. This air is always about 8 degrees cooler than that of this atrium. A building which isn't air-conditioned has more variations in temperature than an air-conditioned building, that's a fact. This means, of course, that people working and living here have to wear light clothes in summer and warm clothes in winter. But on the other hand, they can open the windows anytime. And as you can see near the galleries, they can go out anytime. Thus, they are masters of their environment. They control their environment, and that was the aim. There are some people in the field who think they can solve the problems of technology by using more technology. And they think this will reduce energy consumption. It may be so, it may work, but in doing so, they forget the human aspects of sustainable construction. I believe it's a basic human need to establish relationships as directly as possible, without the interference of meta languages or devices. Direct human-to-human relations with nature, to the things concerning us. And all the contraptions that come between us and things, even something like electric windows openers, are actually like useless translators. They only remove us from our normal relationship to nature and the basics. And that's one of the reasons why we have treated our environment so badly over the last 100 years. We have gone further and further away from what's essential. The aim of this building has always been to allow people working here to control their own work environment, to actually create it. By opening windows that can be opened and pushing open doors, people are given the opportunity to go out and use these terraces, which wasn't part of the initial plan. Down there, for example, you can see a small terrace, which was actually created during the construction period.
Constructed using mass-marketed tools and materials, Altera Institute of Wageningen in the Netherlands proves that sustainable architecture is not limited to a small number of exceptional buildings. High-tech and low-tech can work together to diffuse ecological building practices.
The question of sustainability and the definition of this sustainability obviously seems to be the thing everyone is fascinated by, and it's the holy grail. If you just say it's energy efficient building, a building with a solar panel on the roof is sustainable, I would definitely say that's not. Yeah, that's too narrow. Yeah, a building that is built out of cardboard and can be recycled, it's also too narrow. Yeah, you have to accept that if you really want to talk about sustainable developments, and that goes from a building to a little neighborhood to a city, yeah, you have to think of something that works at a social level, almost first and foremost. And for that to be sustainable, it has to work financially. It definitely, most importantly, has to work socially, politically. And yes, it should be dense. Yeah, you need a dense population. So density is a crucial aspect of sustainability. The question of being sustainable or being energy efficient, to take the tiny little aspect of sustainability, and how you can push that in other parts of the world is very difficult. There's no doubt that it's very difficult, because first of all, you deal with different cultures, but even within the different cultures, you have some individuals that are all for it, and some that actually are not interested. And in the overall balance of things, if money is your sole objective as a client, it becomes very difficult to convince that client to think about others.
So I think that in that sense, the quality of design has the capability of affecting the quality of our lives. And maybe one of the challenges for the future is how we increase urban density in a world with a rising population, how we can increase density and at the same time improve the quality of urban life. I think that these are the challenges, and all the issues that we're talking about come together. And in one sense, cities are always need to be continually balanced.
Here, culture has also evolved. In regards to accepting flaws, we're beginning to question the myth of scientific perfection. It's an ethical attitude to accept flaws and imperfection. I think it's very important to the whole concept of sustainable development. If you're dogmatic, if you forget humanity, if you only think of the planet, then there's a serious danger. Definitely a real danger. You should always position yourself in relation to what's human, and especially position yourself by accepting limits and imperfection.
Das nachhaltige Bauen ist in Deutschland zu einer Disziplin des Bauens.
As sustainability has become part of construction in Germany and has been widely accepted within our society, we are now attempting to quantify things. It would seem that the only thing left for us to do is to look at the simple energy consumption of buildings. This concerns me greatly. I think that it's more complex than that. I think that the term sustainability is a harmonic term. It includes a lot of different things. For me, it means constructing buildings which, in all aspects or most aspects, serve the people working and living in them. And also buildings which serve the environment and the society by disturbing them as little as possible.
Now I think there's a definite interest for the topic of sustainability. Yeah? In some areas, let's say China, maybe the topic isn't that interesting yet, but I'm positive and optimistic it will come, because there's no counter argument. So at some point it will come. and you just have to keep pushing.